A civilization lost among giant heads. In the heart of the forest, a traveler trying to find their way through the dense trees becomes aware of another sound amidst the rustle of damp leaves. This is not the sound of the wind speaking with the leaves. It is a call, as if coming from beneath the earth itself. Stepping carefully, the traveler reaches a clearing and cannot make sense of what stands before them. A colossal stone head, half buried in the earth. Its eyes are looking at them. In that moment, they are unaware that they have come face to face with the spirit of a civilization that lived thousands of years ago. This is the first encounter, but it is not the last. This head is a gateway to the world of the Olmecs. The Olmec civilization is one not often mentioned in history books, yet it has found a growing echo in the depths of archaeology and cultural anthropology. They are considered the first great civilization of Mesoamerica. This society, which emerged in the southeast of present-day Mexico, particularly in the states of Veracruz and Tabasco, represents a cornerstone that laid the cultural foundation not only for its own time, but for the hundreds of years that followed. And those who first discovered them were not even aware of what they were looking for. When 19th century explorers and missionaries in the region came across giant stone heads under the dense forest canopy, they thought they were strange rocks shaped by nature. However, over time, excavations revealed that these were monumental sculptures, deliberately carved with facial expressions and helmet-like headdresses. These heads, each weighing between 6 and 12 tons, can sometimes reach a height of 3 meters, and each has its own unique facial features. This suggests that the sculptures are likely individual portraits. To some, they were monuments to warriors, to others, to sacred leaders. However, the issue is not just the size of the sculptures, but why and how they were made. The Olmecs had no iron. They did not use the wheel. They were largely devoid of animal power. But despite this, they quarried, transported, and carved extremely hard stones like basalt from hundreds of kilometers away and skillfully placed them in their cities. This was an indicator not only of physical strength, but also of engineering and organizational skill. So, how could such an advanced society have vanished so silently from the stage of history? This question lies at the heart of research concerning the Olmecs, because we still do not have a deciphered writing system belonging to the Olmecs. Most historians accept that the Olmecs used symbols and may have developed an early writing system. However, we have not yet deciphered what these symbols mean. This implies that the Olmecs can only make their voices heard through stone, earth, and art. The giant heads they left behind, the ornate ceremonial masks, the stone carvings, and the city ruins. All of these are etched into time like a silent scream. Yet, this silence does not diminish their influence. On the contrary, the Olmecs, like invisible architects, constructed the cultural codes of later Mesoamerican civilizations, such as the Maya and the Aztecs. Many elements, like the solar calendar, the ball game, ceremonial pyramid architecture, and even sacrificial rituals, originate from the Olmecs. They are like a mother culture, a civilization whose own story has remained in the shadows, but which has formed the foundation for the stories of others. In the modern world, the Olmecs are generally known only through these stone heads. Yet these heads are just a small facet of this people's intellect, spirit, and art. In reality, behind these faces were people who knew agriculture, built cities, thought in symbols, watched the heavens, and perhaps looked at the world from a completely different perspective. They were priests who watched the sky, farmers who created fertile lands in a tropical climate, and artists who created mythological worlds adorned with jaguar motifs. The Olmecs are a mystery that modern historical science has yet to fully solve. The scarcity of writing, the limited archaeological data, and the deterioration of remains due to the climate make studying this civilization difficult. However, excavations and new analytical techniques from the last 30 years are allowing this silent civilization to emerge with increasing clarity. In this section, we will try to understand the Olmecs not just through their giant stone heads, but with their spirits, intellect, engineering, and culture. Because these stone heads are not merely silent witnesses of the past, but also the call of a forgotten civilization. The birth and identification of the Olmecs, a discovery among ruins. Some civilizations leave their mark on history with magnificent temples, others with whispers. The Olmecs are in the second group. Their story is read from the traces within the silence. They have neither long inscriptions nor monumental city chronicles. Yet, the things they left behind clearly show that they were among history's first great engineers and metaphysical thinkers. The birth of the Olmecs, much like the giant stone heads they created, carries an invisible meaning, silent but profound. The Olmecs emerge around 1600 BC. This date is known as Mesoamerica's pre-classic period. Until then, small agricultural communities lived in the region. But the Olmecs appear suddenly. They establish their first cities, build complex religious structures, form a social hierarchy, and create trade networks. This sudden rise is termed a civilizational explosion by some historians. So, where did this people come from? To date, two main theories have been developed regarding the origin of the Olmecs. The first is that the Olmecs were an indigenous people. That is, they are thought to represent a cultural leap emerging from the natural evolution of this region. The second view is that the Olmecs were inspired by an external influence. According to this view, seafarers from across the Pacific or the early Andean civilizations in South America may have acted as a catalyst for Olmec culture. However, no direct archaeological evidence for this second view has yet been found. Nevertheless, the cultural sudden development of the Olmecs keeps this debate alive. The first major Olmec settlement, San Lorenzo, is considered the center of this civilization. The structures excavated here are an advanced example of urban planning, water management, and symbolic architecture. Archaeologists have found large ceremonial areas, ritual platforms, irrigation canals, and giant stone sculptures here. The colossal stone heads, made especially from basalt, were placed at the entrances and sacred centers of this city. What is interesting is that some of these giant stones were transported from mountains approximately 50 to 100 kilometers away. How was this possible without the wheel, animal power, or metal tools? This question is just one of the elements that makes the Olmecs mysterious. Another major settlement, La Venta, later becomes the religious and political center of the Olmecs. The complex of structures here consists of monumental platforms arranged around an axis, pyramid-like structures, and large burial mounds. The Great Pyramid at La Venta is actually one of the oldest known pyramid structures and is about 34 meters high. This structure would later serve as a model for Maya and Aztec architecture. However, what truly surprised archaeologists was not just the physical structure of these cities, but also the conscious design philosophy underlying them. Certain astronomical alignments are seen in Olmec cities. The structures may have been positioned according to celestial events like solstices and equinoxes. Furthermore, underground drainage systems were built to prevent ceremonial areas from flooding. This is an indicator not only of technical skill, but also of cosmological thought. In other words, the Olmecs built their cities not just to live in, but to live in harmony with the universe. One of the most striking excavation sites is the El Manatee region. Evidence of water-dedicated ceremonies has been found here. Wooden sculptures, ceramic figurines, jade stones, and even the remains of sacrificed children. These show that the Olmecs were trying to establish not only a terrestrial, but also a spiritual world order. For them, water was not just life, but also a way to communicate with the gods. Modern discoveries first brought the existence of this silent civilization to light in the late 19th century. However, systematic research on the Olmecs was not initiated until the mid-20th century. In the 1940s, an American archaeologist named Matthew Sterling studied the sites where Olmec stone heads were found and proved that they were much older than previously thought. This was a finding that completely changed the history of Mesoamerica, because it was previously thought that the Maya and Aztecs were the first great civilizations. Yet, the Olmecs were their silent architects, extending back centuries before them. However, the late discovery of the Olmecs also led to misunderstandings. Especially during the 20th century, some alternative history writers put forward theories that the giant stone heads were of African origin. It was claimed that some facial features resembled those of African individuals. However, modern genetic, linguistic, and archaeological analyses have refuted these theories. The Olmecs are a direct continuation of the Native American peoples. The facial features are natural variations within the genetic diversity of the region. Historians and archaeologists study the development of the Olmecs in 3 periods. Early Olmec period, 1600 to 1200 BC. The rise of San Lorenzo, the creation of the first giant stone sculptures, the centralization of agriculture. Middle period, 1200 to 900 BC. La Venta becomes the center, development of religious architecture. Late period, 900 to 400 BC. The rise of Tres Zapotes, regional dispersal, the peak of symbolic art. This periodical structure shows that the Olmecs did not disappear at once. On the contrary, they spread regionally, passing on their cultural influences to neighboring peoples. Olmec culture, over time, becomes embedded in the belief systems of the Maya and other societies. Its name may be erased, but its spirit lives on. The memory of stone. What is the meaning of the giant heads? A face buried in the earth within the forest appears older than time itself. The facial features are distinct: thick eyebrows, a wide nose, a strong jaw. On its head is a headdress resembling a warrior's helmet. It is a human portrait, but at the same time, it is a monument. a memory. It reflects not only the person it depicts, but also the worldview of the civilization that carved it. This is what the Olmec colossal heads are, the very essence of this silent yet magnificent memory. To date, 17 colossal stone heads have been found, and they are considered the most striking examples of Olmec art. Each one is unique. No two are alike. This detail indicates that the sculptures represent specific individuals. Their facial expressions differ. Some are serious, some threatening, some pensive. The detailed carving of the facial features suggests that these sculptures are not merely abstract symbols, but portraits of real people. Who were these people? Leaders? Warriors? Shamans? Perhaps each was a combination of these roles. But the most fundamental question still stands: why only the head? In Mesoamerican cultures, the head was not considered an ordinary limb, but the carrier of the personal essence. It was believed that the head was connected to the soul. Cutting off an enemy's head was not just a physical punishment, but also meant destroying their spiritual memory. Within this belief structure, the colossal stone heads not only represent a person, but also immortalize their spiritual power. Therefore, these heads become at once a monument, a totem, and a sacred entity. Some of the headdresses on the sculptures feature feather patterns, reliefs, geometric motifs, or animal figures. These symbols could indicate personal ranks, tribal affiliations, or spiritual roles. A stone head both physically bears a person's face and presents that person's ritual identity through symbols. It is a kind of stone identity card. Olmec sculptors were incredibly skilled in stonemasonry. The giant stones were usually made from extremely hard rocks like basalt. According to findings, these stones were brought from the Tuxtla Mountains, 50 to 100 kilometers away from city centers like San Lorenzo and La Venta. The transportation, carving, and erection of these stones in an age without the wheel, draft animals, or metal tools is an engineering marvel in itself. So how did they do it? Stone hammers, traces of sand polishing, and rhythmic carving techniques found in excavations show that the Olmecs used an advanced method in stonework that was in harmony with nature. First, the stone was roughly shaped at the quarry, then transported by rafts via rivers and detailed on-site. This process could take weeks or even months. This shows us how developed organization, division of labor, and ritual coordination were in Olmec society. It is thought that there were specialized groups of workers for these tasks, and that sculptors even held a special status in society. The areas where the stone heads were placed were not random either. They were generally positioned in ceremonial areas, at city entrances, or at the center of sacred axes. This suggests that the sculptures served both a protective and an authentic identity-declaring function. Some researchers have noticed that the faces of the sculptures were placed to look in specific directions. For example, to the east or southeast. It is thought that these directions are linked to the sunrise, equinoxes, or agricultural cycles. This means the stone heads may have served not only as identifiers, but also as temporal guides. Moreover, ritual objects have frequently been found around these sculptures. Small masks made of jade, sacrificial pits, figurines, incense remnants. These show that the sculptures were actively involved in ritual life. Perhaps incense was burned on certain days, Prayers were offered and offerings were left. These areas were not just visual monuments, but living sacred centers. According to modern archaeology, the stone heads are a mirror not only of Olmec art, but also of the Mesoamerican thought system. However, this thought system was misunderstood for a long time. Especially in the 20th century, some alternative historians suggested that these stone heads represented African individuals or were connected to alien beings. The resemblance of facial features to certain genetic groups fueled these speculations, which lacked a scientific basis. However, both genetic studies and cultural context analyses have clarified that these sculptures belong entirely to the indigenous Mesoamerican peoples. The stone heads are also a form of communication. In a period where their written language was limited, the Olmecs used these sculptures to transfer intergenerational memory. Each head is a story, sometimes a war, sometimes a sacrificial ceremony, sometimes a leader's reign. In this sense, the Olmec stone heads are like biographies written in the language of stone, unwritten but unforgettable. The permanence of these sculptures also reveals the relationship the Olmecs had with time. They were a people who measured time not in the abstract, but with stone. For them, stone was not just a material, it was a medium that recorded time, spirit, and power. These heads, still standing today, carry that spirit to us even after thousands of years. Imagine the face of a warrior who once lived in a tropical city, whose language and name have long been forgotten, is still looking at us. And that gaze hangs in the air like a question posed to history itself. Symbol, writing, and astrology, the silent language of intellect. If you want to understand the mental world of a civilization, you must examine not only its stones, but also its symbols. Because symbols go beyond words. The Olmecs may not have left behind a written literature, but they carried their thoughts beyond time with the symbols they carved into stones, figurines, and ceramics. Their language bears the traces of a silent intellect, and hidden within this silence is the world of a people who spoke with the stars. The Olmec civilization developed one of the oldest known symbolic systems in Mesoamerica. To date, archaeologists have identified complex groups of symbols on various ritual stones, ceremonial masks, and monumental stelae. These symbols, in some cases, exhibit repetitive structures, which shows that they were not merely decorative, but part of a meaningful system. This means the Olmecs may have had an early writing system, even if it has not yet been fully deciphered. One of the most debated examples is the stone tablet called the Cascajal block. Discovered in 2006, this block contains 62 different symbols. The symbols are arranged in a specific order and include repeating motifs. According to some experts, this indicates that the Olmecs had developed a proto-writing or symbolic communication system. The Cascajal block is currently considered the oldest written document in Mesoamerica. If this stone can be properly deciphered, a new page could be opened in our map of human history. So, what do these symbols narrate? Olmec symbols include natural phenomena, animal figures, abstract geometric shapes, and sacred objects. These figures are connected to the cosmology that forms the basis of the Olmec belief system. In other words, The relationship between the sky, earth, water, and humans was represented in an abstract narrative within the symbols. For example, some stones feature intertwined spiral patterns. These patterns could symbolize both the cycle of life and the movement of the sun across the sky. Animals are also an indispensable part of the symbolic system. The jaguar, in particular, is at the center of Olmec beliefs. The jaguar is the symbol of the underworld, power, and transformation. Similarly, the frequently encountered figures of snakes, birds, and frogs in the symbols express the connection with natural elements and spiritual powers. These symbols were not just ornaments, but the Olmec people's way of understanding and expressing the world. However, symbols do not only narrate nature, they also encode time. The Olmecs were a civilization that observed the sky and tried to understand the cycle of the stars. One piece of evidence that helps us understand this is that some monumental structures and stele arrangements show celestial alignments. Especially on equinox days, the sunlight falling on certain parts of the structures was designed to meet with symbols in ceremonial areas. This shows that the Olmecs possessed astronomical wisdom. Even more interesting is that these symbols carried a desire not just to narrate celestial events, but to command time. For the Olmecs, time was not a straight line, but a cyclical flow. Just as days follow nights and seasons follow each other, human life is understood within a cycle. The symbolic representation of this cyclicality shows the depth of the Olmecs' understanding of the concept of time. They were not just measuring time, they were forming ritual bonds with it. In this context, it is seen that the symbols developed by the Olmecs carried a multi-layered function, not just as a pre-writing system, but also as a cosmic calendar, social order, mythological structure, and ritual calendar. In other words, for them, symbols were a tool for both storing information and producing sacred meaning. And perhaps that is why they have no written texts left, because everything was already carved into stone, mask, and sky. The archaeological counterpart to this symbolic system is also quite rich. For example, masks made of jade, ritual figurines, and animal carvings were used in specific ceremonies. Some of these objects feature repetitive symbols. Motifs like triangles, double spirals, and inward-looking eyes are seen in different combinations on different objects. This suggests that the Olmecs used symbols not as a fixed language, but as a system that varied according to context. Today, many researchers argue that it may be misleading to directly match these symbols with modern written languages, because the Olmec symbolic system may not have been a narrative language, but a language of sacred expression. Perhaps each symbol carried not just the object itself, but its sacred, social, and universal meanings all at once. In this respect, the symbols were not just words, but a frequency of thought. The effects of this system continue in later civilizations. Traces of Olmec symbols are present in the origin of Mayan glyphs. Even the origins of some ritual arrangements in the Aztec belief system are traced back to the calendrical structures organized by the Olmecs with symbols. This shows that the Olmecs were not just a civilization, but architects of ideas. The silence of the symbols is the voice of the Olmecs' intellect. They did not write, but they thought. They did not narrate, but they coded. Every stone, every mask, every figurine whispers from the past like an unseen word. This whisper is directed not only to archaeologists, but to the memory of humanity. Because what truly keeps a civilization alive is how it looked at the stars, how it understood time, and how it defined the meaning of being human. The Olmec symbolic system was a deep part of not only daily life, but also agricultural and calendrical cycles. Decisions such as when to plant crops, when to harvest, and sensing periods of drought or abundance were guided by celestial observations and symbolic signs. The cycles of Venus were particularly important for the Olmecs. Traces in later Mayan documents show that certain rituals were performed according to the position of Venus in the sky, and that times of war or peace were determined by it. This situation indicates that the Olmecs used symbols not only as a cultural tool, but also as an operational one. Another remarkable element might be that the use of symbols was not open to all segments of society. According to some experts, Olmec symbols could only be read by certain priests, leaders, or a trained elite class. This suggests that the symbols functioned as a kind of secret knowledge system. Writing was not a form of communication open to everyone, but a tool of power understood by the chosen and controlled by the rulers. In this respect, Olmec. The silence of disappearance. Why did they leave? Who carried on? Some civilizations end with a magnificent collapse. Fires, wars, invasions. History books love to tell these scenes. But the Olmecs disappeared so silently that only a memory echoing in the stones remained. No great wars, no dramatic invasions. The Olmecs withdrew from the scene as one of history's most mysterious losses. But why? The decline of the Olmec civilization begins around 400 BC. After this date, the population in Olmec cities starts to decrease, monumental architectural activities cease, and ritual areas are abandoned. Major centers like San Lorenzo, La Venta, and Tres Zapotes either slowly empty out or transform into smaller surrounding settlements. This transformation is not sudden, but it is permanent. As a civilization slowly withdraws from the stage, it leaves behind new cultural traces. So what was the reason for this decline? A definitive answer cannot be given to this question. However, a few strong hypotheses are being considered. Climate change. Some archaeoclimatologists have detected significant climatic fluctuations in the region during this period. Prolonged droughts, floods, and imbalances in the agricultural cycle may have shaken the agriculture-based economy that formed the foundation of Olmec society. Changes in riverbeds. Geological movements may have caused shifts in the river system, especially around San Lorenzo. This could have cut off the city's access to water and rendered the settlements non-functional. In this case, the people may have migrated to other regions. Social conflicts and rebellions. The excessive strengthening of the central elite class and the unfair distribution of resources may have created unrest among the populace. Traces of deliberate destruction of monuments in some archaeological sites strengthen the possibility of an internal rupture. Interaction with external cultures. The Olmecs were in intense cultural interaction with other regions of Mesoamerica. Over time, this interaction may have led to the dilution of cultural identity and the assimilation of the Olmec style among neighboring peoples with larger populations. One or more of these four factors, working together, may have accelerated the dissolution of Olmec society. But what is remarkable here is that the disappearance of the Olmecs was not a destruction, but a transformation. Because the Olmecs did not disappear, they continued to live on within others. The Maya civilization took almost everything the Olmecs left behind and developed it within itself. Calendar systems, ceremonial architecture, symbolic writing, the jaguar belief, and celestial alignments. All of these are Maya interpretations of the Olmec heritage. Similarly, the Aztecs also saw Olmec iconography as a sacred source and integrated Olmec figures into their own history. Some researchers argue that the Olmecs gradually integrated with Proto-Maya peoples, thereby ensuring both genetic and cultural transmission. This view suggests that the Olmecs did not vanish into thin air, but merely continued their existence by changing their name. When we talk about the Olmecs today, we question not only the past, but also how history is written. Because the Olmecs were not recorded as either winners or the conquered. They were a people who disappeared in archaeological silence, yet whose symbols blended into the myths of other peoples. And this silence is, in fact, a powerful form of narrative. Modern history focuses on dramatic destructions, burned cities, severed heads, conquered peoples. Yet the Olmecs neither suffered a major invasion nor were they erased by another civilization. This is a historically rare situation, because the collapse itself is almost invisible, and this invisibility transports the Olmecs to another plane, a civilization that seeped out of mythological time and beyond history. In this context, the disappearance of the Olmecs shows similarities to early urban civilizations like Harappa. The cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro also suddenly fell silent and were later reprocessed by subsequent cultures. So it was with the Olmecs. They disappeared, but at the same time, they spread. They left their symbols, if not their language, their architectural codes, if not their names. This soft disappearance has initiated a philosophical debate among archaeologists. Does the end of a civilization mean it is forgotten? Or does its continued existence within those who remember it make it even more permanent? Today, we can see the influence of the Olmecs not only in Maya or Aztec structures, but in the national consciousness of Mexico, in Latin American art, and even in the memory of Western archaeology. The colossal stone heads in particular have been a source of inspiration for many modern artists throughout the 20th century, and have also become a symbol in shaping Mexico's own identity. The silence that followed the disappearance of the Olmecs is as mystical as their intellectual world itself. Archaeologists find incense remnants in abandoned ritual areas in some regions. It is as if someone left a ceremonial scene half-finished. Perhaps the people left thinking they would one day return. Perhaps this abandonment is part of a conscious transition. Just like a priest leaving an old temple to build a new sacred site according to a new calendar. Today, if we are looking for a civilization that echoes in the silence, the Olmecs are the best example. Their disappearance is not a kind of dissolution, but a diffusion. The Olmecs etched themselves not into history, but into memory. The face of the last stone head may still be under the ground, and the person who finds it may not be a historian, but an artist, a child, someone who dreams. Because the Olmecs continue to live not only in archaeology, but in the deepest layers of the imagination. This is why the Olmec civilization should be evaluated not as historically lost, but as a reshaped civilization. They were a bridge. They were the first great leap of Mesoamerica. They were the pioneers of writing, ritual, architecture, and cosmic thought. And all the civilizations that came after them walked on the stones of this bridge. To remember the Olmecs today is not just to recall the giant stone heads, but to hear a silence that has learned to speak with time. They show us that a civilization can sustain its existence not only with the structures it leaves behind, but also with the way of thinking it transmits. Even if a people disappears, their observation, their intuition, their gaze at the stars, and their effort to make sense of life can permeate the spirit of other peoples. In this sense, the Olmecs are not a civilization forgotten on the edge of history, but one hidden at the center of others. When the last stone head was unearthed, archaeologists cataloged it, cleaned it, and took it to the museum. But the real discovery was not in the face of that stone. The great question that echoed in the stone's silence still remains with us. What does it take for a civilization to truly disappear? Or do the Olmecs still live somewhere inside us?
One like, one subscription. That's the power behind these stories. Support me, and I'll bring more tales to life. Your like lifts me up, and every new subscriber opens the door to another magical story.